what is depression? How is it diagnosed?
Yeah, so depression, again, I think we think of, in terms of a real clinical depression, people can use the word, oh, I'm depressed, or this feels like I'm in a state of depression. I think we can use that casually, but thinking about it in a real clinical way, depression is usually characterized by a lack of enjoyment in things that people once found pleasurable. So that could be things like maybe like eating or sex or hobbies or whatever that is. If people engage in them in the same way, they don't have the same level of like happiness or joy that they bring. Another thing is sleep disruption. A lot of times people maybe are sleeping too long and have hyposomnia. Other people are hypersonic, and so there's or insomnia, so they can't sleep. So usually we think of sleep disruption. And oftentimes people just have a general sense of maybe hopelessness. They don't really feel like there's really a lot for them to look forward to. And these are some of the bigger hallmarks of someone that might be actually have more clinical depression than just maybe a passive kind of feeling of being depressed over something.
Right. How does depression feel?
That's interesting. I think it probably feels different from person to person. I think sometimes there's people that talk about maybe gender differences with depression. Men can maybe have more sort of agitation or irritability. But in general, I think people feel a sense of kind of fatigue, feeling tired, maybe lethargic. They feel like maybe there's something that they're missing based on the response that they see that their friends or family or peers or the culture should be responding with more excitement or interest in things, and that they feel like somehow they're missing out on those things.
Right.
So I just generally think, a lot of times people think that there's actual physical aches and pains that go along with depression, and I think that's entirely possible too, although that's not necessarily a criteria of it. But I think it's, a lot of people will talk about, and again, this isn't a diagnostic criteria, but just a sort of feeling of like a heavy heart or a weight in their shoulders. I mean, these are sort of the metaphors that people feel sort of burdened and heavy and kind of a tightness or things like that.
Well, what you were just describing was making me think of the ego versus the id. And it sounds like when you were saying like men express depression in kind of like agitation or something like that, it, to me has a lot to do with society's idea of masculinity. And
that's true too. I mean, I think men can certainly feel sad and blue the way we think of depression more broadly, but I do think there's probably a way that rather than feeling like that feels a safe emotion to explore and to process and like move towards, I think oftentimes anger, agitation, or irritability somehow feels better or more appropriate for men.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Well, how would you treat depression in a counseling session?
Sure. So there's lots of different interventions and lots of different theoretical orientations that counselors can use to try to treat depression. But I think, again, one of the most common and preferred by insurance companies, because there's a lot of evidence based to treating depression, is using cognitive behavioral therapy. So it's similarly kind of taking people's ideas or thoughts that they have about their experience and really kind of looking at those, doing a lot of reality testing on those thoughts. Because again, something like depression, chances are there's some maybe really skewed or exaggerated or kind of distorted ways of viewing one's experience or their, how their view of the world. So it's a way of kind of like deconstructing those, and is there a way to maybe think more broadly, more all-encompassing about something, learning how to kind of be less reactive to things that people experience. So it's really looking at someone's thoughts, and then what are the behaviors people are engaging in when they're thinking these things? How do we change behaviors? How do we maybe increase a lot of lifestyle like changes? Things like maybe someone has really poor appetite, and so how do you start being mindful about the kinds of food you're eating? Or how are you making time in terms of exercise? We know has been highly researched for things like anxiety and depression. It really can absolutely kind of lift some of those symptoms if someone's engaging, even in just going for walks out in nature can be really therapeutic.
So there's been more public discourse about depression recently.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it's helping uh, deassociate the stigmas attached to it?
I do. I think that well, at least amongst with college students as well, there is. I've actually looked at some research into this recently. There is the idea of stigma. There's like a personal stigma versus a perceived stigma, and I can't say specifically about depression in this study, but more broadly around mental health issues. Personal stigma is going down, and that basically means the person that actually says, hey, I have no problem if anyone needs treatment or support for a mental health issue. That's like around, I think, 7, 8, 9% now. And that's come down maybe something in the teens or around 15, 16%. So in other words, most people, if they feel like, I'm not going to judge a person for having to seek that support. So most people are okay with that. But the perceived stigma, so that's like, what does society, the culture say about someone seeking out these services? And that's still pretty high, around like maybe 39, 40%. So even though personally people feel like it's not, they wouldn't judge someone, there is this idea that the culture may judge us.
Interesting.
It is interesting.
Well, because I had a thought of this question because I was watching a college football game, and they were talking about the quarterback was dealing with some anxiety and depression issues. And they were calling him brave and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's coming up more and more. But
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think so things like social media, like there's some evidence to suggest that social media may be a hindrance if people already are prone to depression and anxiety. There can be ways that tuning into too much social media can exacerbate those conditions, but it's also something where it reaches a lot of people. So people have social media campaigns. There's a really great nonprofit called Active Minds, and it's basically a mental health advocacy group on college campuses, and it's really, there's like a, it's really student run. There may be like a faculty or staff advisor, but it's really for college students. And they've done a ton on stigma reduction and just bringing these issues to college campuses and just normalizing it, because the truth is, I think it's like maybe half of us, 50% of us in our lifetime will probably experience some episode in the mental health realm, some disruption where we're actually going to need to seek treatment for it.
all right, thank you.